Hi, folks. Pastor Mike Spalding here with my good friend and big brother.
I'm Pastor Casper, and we're here together to encourage you to keep listening to Deception Detection Radio, because we're both on this network with our individual shows.
Yes,
and we're going to be doing some things together as well. Nudge, nudge, say no more.
Hey, folks, tune in Deception Detection Radio. Some of the best programming in Christian talk, news, encouragement, and Bible studies. God bless you.
God bless.
Eyes in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you.
Welcome to Deception Detection Radio. I'm Kay.
And I'm Chad.
We pray you all had a blessed week.
Are you aware that right here on our soil we have America's Stonehenge? It was opened to the public by Robert Stone in 1953. Robert Stone's son Dennis Stone took over and is now the president of America's Stonehenge. Dennis has been involved with America's Stonehenge for most of his life and has always had a fascination with archaeology and archaeoastronomy. Since retiring, Dennis has found many serpentine walls and spirit windows throughout the site, among other new discoveries. Joining us tonight to discuss America's Stonehenge, we welcome Dennis Stone.
Well, welcome to Deception Detection Radio, Dennis. Thank you for joining us. How are you tonight?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing pretty well. Thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and glad to hear it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do tonight's opening prayer, and then we'll get into it. Everyone ready?
Yes.
I'm all set.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us all together, and we ask you to lead tonight's broadcast. Let your words be our words, and let us hear, Lord, what you want us to hear. Guide our path. And please put a hedge of protection around us and around our listeners, that no interference can come. And just keep those lines clear, Father, so that your word is clear and that we can hear your message. I pray this, Father, in Jesus' holy and mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Dennis, we're so happy to have you with us. Now, America's Stonehenge, a lot of people haven't heard of it, or they don't know quite what it is. What is America's Stonehenge, and how did you get involved with it?
Well, again, I thank both of you for having me on, and your listeners. My family actually got involved with it back in 1955. It was my dad, Robert Stone, and he had just got out of the Coast Guard. He had been in the Coast Guard for a few years, and he had basically married my mom, started a new family. In 1955, I think he had been already at Western Electric, AT&T, Bell Labs for just a couple of years. And on a Friday night, he used to listen to a big radio station in Boston that's still there. It's an AM station. And actually, when he was in the Coast Guard up in Labrador at a Loran navigation station, he used to listen to it up there, so he could stay in touch with home that way. But on the Friday night, the show was a show called Yankee Yarns, and the talk show host was Alton Hall Blackington. And the subject that night was a subject about our place called America's Stonehenge today. And back then it was known as Paddy's Caves or the Great Stone Village. And it really surprised my dad because he only lived 8 miles away from this site. He had never heard of it before. And it really surprised him that something like this could actually exist next door and not be known by him or by many people. So that really got his fascination. And a couple of days later, he was in a barber shop waiting to have his hair cut, and he picked up a magazine. It was a magazine called New Hampshire Profile. And he's flipping through the pages, and all of a sudden, there's a whole feature article about the same thing he had heard just a couple of days before, kind of a coincidence. And he was like, wow. So he asked the barber if he could keep it. And he goes, well, how old is that magazine? My dad goes, it's 1952. It's 3 years old. He goes, sucks. I hadn't taken it home with it. And that weekend, my aunt and uncle and my dad and I think about 10 people used to get together on Saturday night and socialize, play cards. And at one point, my dad took the magazine, stuck it on the table, and everybody passed it around looking at it. Nobody recognized it until it got to my aunt and uncle. And they looked at it and kind of stared at it. And they said, oh, wait a minute. We used to go there in the 1930s, you know. We used to go up there and picnic. They rode their bicycles down about 8 miles or 10 miles from the next town. And they were quite surprised, of course, to see the article. And my dad was, wow, you think we could buy the place? So that next day, the Sunday, the four of them, my mom, dad, my aunt, and uncle, got in the car and rode all over the place in this area trying to find a road to goes to this, where the site actually was located. You know, it wasn't open to the public and there was no signs. Finally found a road that looks sort of familiar, a dirt road, and they parked the car at the bottom and they walked up and they found the site. And then my dad, after that, he just basically fell in love with the place. And he mentioned to my mom he'd love to someday maybe own it or operate it and open it to the public. And because her comment was something about you have rocks in your head, you know. So it was 1955, almost 65 years ago. And at that time, I hate to date myself, I was just a baby at the time. So I think I stayed with grandmother, but it's been with me my whole life pretty much. So I have a son, too, named Kelsey. He's a third generation. And so he's an engineer just like my dad is. So it's been with us a whole pretty, about 65 years.
That's awesome. You really do have what a family heritage and lineage to pass down.
And we get the right name, too, I guess, just one of those, another coincidence.
I told Chad that.
Yeah, right. Everybody wonders about that. But it is our name. And but we actually opened it up in 1958, so we just had our 60th celebration. And it turns out it was in a summer solstice in 1958, which kind of surprised me. I was going through my dad's archives. He passed away about 9 years ago, and we're still going through all his materials and files and everything. And that was kind of a surprise. I thought it was in the spring of 58, but it was actually summer solstice. And at that time, we did not know it was aligned with the sun, moon, or stars. It wasn't until 1967 that research actually began. So another one of those coincidences, I guess. But so I was in the airlines for 35 years. So we've all had our full-time jobs and careers, and then kind of running this on the side and doing, research and investigation. By 1964, my dad actually started a group called New England Antiquities Research Association to research these sites. And at that time, they knew of about a dozen sites like this in the Northeast. Today, there's over 800 from eastern Canada right through New England, New York, and right into the mid-Atlantic states. There's about 800 of these sites. And my dad, he died, like I say, 9 years ago. I think when he died, they knew of about 600 or 700, and today it's up to about 800 sites. So these things are still being discovered out in the woods by people that are doing research, sometimes hunters, or just people out hiking and stuff like that to report these strange stone structures. And then a group like NERA might send somebody out to take photographs, measure it, and document it, which is kind of nice, So
yeah, but
what
also
we think is it's an ancient.
Some of them have also been destroyed as well. The one that was in was it Missouri, St. Louis? That used to be known as Mound City. And, I mean, it had one of the biggest mounds out there. And back in, I think it was the late 1800s, they flattened it. I mean, they literally flattened it.
That's a great point. I just got a Facebook picture, somebody on one of these posts, about ancient sites. And they had a picture of the cranes actually leveling one of the gigantic pyramids there in St. Louis, And I've been I used to go out to St. Louis for training as a pilot back in the 90s, and I used to fly through there up to about a couple of years ago when I retired. And until about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I knew about Cahokia Mountain State Park in Illinois, right across the river. But I wasn't aware that St. Louis was built over ancient mounds, and these are huge, as you mentioned. The pictures show them; they're immense. Yeah, they're gone today, and most people. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, I've posted several articles where, they've got the actual photos where you can actually see the mound, the actual drawings and actual photographs, and I mean, yeah, it was massive. I mean, that thing was massive, and like I said, they flattened it over, I think, a 15-year period. They just basically excavated it completely away.
it made a good base for the city, I guess, where the city's sitting today. But boy, I used to fly into Madison, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee, and again, just recently in the last year or two, I didn't know at the time, I flew in there in the 80s, and I flew in there more recently, and like those cities are built on ancient pyramids too, or mounds, and they're underneath the city today, buried, probably flattened them, and all along the Florida coast too, there's a lot that are underneath Clearwater Beach, St. Petersburg, that are actually flat today, so there's an estimate there was about 1 million mounds in the United States, from Florida to Ontario all the way out to Kansas. Today, it may be 200,000. But in the Northeast, we had these megalithic type ruins, and you're correct. There's many of them my dad knew about in the early 60s and late 50s. A lot of the highways were being built at that time. And one of the highways that goes around Boston, 495, actually took out a number of these stone chambers. So all we have is the photographs, the diagrams, and the wreckage, that they took back in the early 60s. And then the bulldozers came along, which is too bad. They probably could have maybe left them in the middle of the highway, in the medium strip, perhaps, I mean, if they could have worked around it, but they're gone. So a number of these, there's still about 800. I'm not sure what the actual estimate of ones that were destroyed, though. But there's a record of about 800 of them anyway. And they're finding the same features in Colorado, these stone features, Missouri, Alabama, and Georgia, North Carolina. The same kind of what we thought was mostly in the New England area. These things are scattered across the country from what we're finding out today. Looks like an ancient stone building culture that's kind of undetected, if you will, or maybe ignored by mainstream in some cases, like these sites really don't exist. They shouldn't be here kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing here in my area. A lot of people that have grown up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they don't know much about Rockwall. They hear the name, they're like, Rockwall City, it's just a city. It's like, no, there's an entire structure that is literally buried underground that is about 7 miles by 4 miles. This thing has walls and everything. It's almost 50 feet tall, and it's completely buried underground. And, most people, like I said, they don't even know about that. But there's another structure. It's 150 miles from Rockwall that's in Milano, Texas, that they had newspaper articles about, that this structure was bigger than the Great Wall of China. And,
wow.
That's what I'm saying. These things are out there. It's just a lot of people don't know about them, and people aren't talking about it.
Yeah, and I know the educational system doesn't seem to discuss these either in the textbooks, or unless a teacher happens to know about them and brings them up. I know I went to school in the 60s and 70s and in college, and I never heard about how many mounds, let alone one mound. I mean, 200,000. I never even heard of one mound out west, And then further out west in California, we have the geoglyphs that look like the ones down in Nazca in Peru. Those beautiful, desert, different types of designs in the desert. The same thing in California. There's about 130 of these ancient geoglyphs you can see from above, like a drone or an airplane or a helicopter, whatever. You get up there and you look down, you can see them, and they're just magnificent. Could be something to do with the same people traveling thousands of miles along the Pacific coast. Possibly. I don't know what the answer will be on that, but they don't even teach that in school, all of this is just, when they get into history, it's like 1492 and then 1620, 1776 kind of thing. They go before that, they go to Western Europe, But we had the most pyramids of anywhere in the world are right here in the U.S. and just part of Canada, the southern part of Canada.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of school groups, and the teachers don't know about that, a lot of surprised looks on the chaperones' faces and the children. We discuss, these kind of things. As you mentioned in St. Louis, they're like, what? So,
yeah,
some of the biggest pyramids in the world are right here.
That's right.
So it's pretty, yeah.
And especially, like Serpent Mound, it's like a lot of people, that's one of the things that's kind of irritating, is that a lot of people, they always want to say, they want to tie this in with Native Americans. But the thing is if you ask the Native Americans, they'll tell you. And that's the thing, is there's one by the name of Chief Joseph Riverwind. He's actually wrote a book called That's What the Old Ones Say. He talks a lot about the actual oral traditions of all the different Native American nations. And he says that, whenever they're asked about stuff like Serpent Mound and stuff like that, or even Cahokia, they'll say that, we didn't build this. This stuff was already here when we got here. This is coming from them, from their mouths. But yet you still got academics that are still out there trying to say, well, this is Native American. Well, the Native Americans are saying they didn't build it.
Right, yeah. I know the Native Americans, in New Hampshire, we have them going back paleo, over 10,000 years to 12. But when I grew up, the legends were that the Native Americans considered a site like ours taboo, a place that wasn't theirs. It was somebody else's, and it was a place you didn't go to. We also met a lady named Paula Underwood. She has since passed away, but she was from California. She was at Iroquois, which is in the Great Lakes, going a little bit towards New York. And her oral tradition that she learned over 10,000 years, she was taught it by her grandfather, and she had to repeat it back, I think, 2 different ways. And she came to our place a couple times, but before she was aware of the Northeast, these stone ruins, her oral tradition talked about these structures on hills, like the ones we have in New England and the greater New England area. She didn't know what the oral tradition, what that meant. She had no idea that these sites existed in the East Coast, But when she found out about these structures, her whole oral tradition made sense to her. But she said her people said it was not built by them. It was built by a different people, a strange people, So just one of those oral tradition things that come down to us that might indicate that they weren't the originators of these structures, But the Native Americans are definitely around, And then in our site, did they stay away from it? Did they participate in it? Or were they participate, more than that, in our construction? We just don't know. But we think that it's probably an old world, people coming across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe, Mediterranean, and probably the northwest part of Africa, coming into the New World. And then, of course, on the other side of the ocean, people coming in from Polynesia and China and possibly Japan onto the West Coast. There's a lot of theories about them coming over before Columbus is what we're really interested in.
Definitely. In fact, you get into the copper mines and stuff like that. It's that's the thing, is like they were over here a long time, and we ain't just talking. They've been finding Egyptian stuff all over the place with like hieroglyphs. Same thing with runes and stuff like that deal with the Nordics, the Germanic Nordics, Vikings, and all that kind of stuff. So this stuff has been littered over here for a long time, and like I said, even the Native Americans, they're talking about that, they encountered these giants, with red hair and black hair, and, especially the Paiutes. The Paiutes, like Lovelock Cave, I'm sure you probably heard those stories as well.
I have. That to me is pretty fascinating. It's just frustration of not being able to get a whole skeletal remains. I think there's parts of bones, but to get a couple to really examine, using modern technology, DNA and all that. But the Smithsonian was, I think, involved with it in the 19th century, actually digging up some of these giants, reporting them. And then supposedly they don't exist anymore. They never did exist, according to some of the mainstream, and some of the mainstream possibly at the Smithsonian, like, we don't know what that is. But but your people were working on this 100-something years ago. What happened to it, So that's fascinating. Yeah.
Did Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira, did they ever give you a copy of their book, Giants on Record?
No, I've met both of them, and I'm in correspondence with them. I just had Jim mention something. I think he was just over in Europe, going through Europe with Hugh Newman. I haven't got that. I know, I think he was also doing a book with Dr. Little out of Memphis, and he's been to our site, too. We've met them all, and one of the people, and that topic is fascinating. One of my publicists.
Yeah, that book covers quite a bit. That's the thing, is they cover quite a bit of the ones that were found here in the United States. Not just the United States, but a lot of them. And that's the thing, is they were finding them up as tall as 23 feet tall here in the United States. In fact, go ahead.
Oh, when did that book come out? Was that fairly recently? Because I know they're coming out with new books all the time. I just saw the announcement of another new book.
It's been out for about 2 years now, so that's why I said if you haven't, you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth getting, because, like I said, they have the actual newspaper articles in there covering all the different ones, and there's like thousands of accounts in there, and they always end with the bones were shipped to the Smithsonian, and it's like that's where it ends. It's like, even before then, because see now, like Steve Quell and Timothy Alberino, who run Gen 6 Productions, they went down to Peru. They were down there, and see, that's the thing is Timothy is he's very fluent in Spanish. He can speak it just as well as he can English, and he was actually going through a lot of the Spanish archives from like the Spanish when they came, and they had the Catholics with them. Basically, they said that these the people down there were actually worshiping the bones of dead giants. They said that some of these giants were like almost 27 feet tall, and that they were sitting on thrones inside of a cave. And I was just like, wow.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I'll have to get that book in for sure. I know L.A. Missouli is another. There's so many people involved with that. L.A. Missouri's been to our place a couple times, and he's into the the giants too, to some degree, the Nephilim, I think it's called. And then worldwide too, these giants being found in North America, but elsewhere, there's finding very, very tall people too, exceptionally tall. Over 8 feet tall, I think. I just can't wait to the day they can find a whole skeleton, if that, and then they can examine it, do all the proper testing, and then that should answer, the question: do these really exist? Yeah. It would be fascinating if they could do that for sure. But I know in Texas too. There's some. I was just talking to a couple from Texas, and they live just east of Shreveport, Louisiana, where they have the Poverty Point and Watkins Break and all of that. And they weren't aware of those. They live right in the area too, and they weren't aware of those gigantic mounds here. They're magnificent. But and I think it's Longview, Texas, if I'm not mistaken. They live. It's just so many. I think they're like an hour or two west of Shreveport in Texas, and they have mounds there where they live too. They have all these mounds. Some have been damaged by road building and construction, but some of them still exist. And the gentleman remembers playing there as a kid on these gigantic mounds. And I knew Texas probably had the mounds, but it's the first time I've actually had somebody say yes, they were in our town. So I had a feeling they did. I used to go to Dallas all the time for training for the airline I work for. But I didn't realize, that if I got in a car and rented and drove to the east, I don't know, probably been a couple-hour drive, I could have actually visited some of these sites in Texas. So even your state has the mounds, too. I know they were in Kansas, and, they're all over the landscape, but I just hadn't heard of the ones in Texas. So that was something I found out this last weekend from the couple. They were up visiting New England. So always learning something about these things.
Yeah, it's very amazing, and one of the things out there where you're at the American Stonehenge, you have an altar out there, and whenever I found out about that altar, I was just like, oh, okay, we're getting into some territory here that I'm a little familiar with, and I've got something that you might not have heard of that I want to plug after you talk about the altar out there.
Yeah, one of the main features of the site, our site's kind of the Reader's Digest version of all these. I mentioned something like 800 sites in the East Coast, pretty much more than New England. The greater area now. Our site has all these features that you can find across the landscape: cairns, standing stones, serpentine walls, these what we call spear windows.
Hello?
I think we lost Dennis there. Dennis, can you hear me? Hello? I'm not even seeing him on the thing. It says he left. Let me see if I can pull him back in. Could have hit a dead zone or something.
Hello?
Hey, there you are.
Yeah, I'm back. Did I lose you?
Yeah, you just started to talk, and then it just went dead. I was just like, hello?
I ran out of things to say, obviously.
Oh, no.
I don't know. It was weird, but you got me back real quick. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I did anything on my side. I just had my head to the phone, like normal, but
it could have been a dead zone or something with these cell phones nowadays.
Well,
Well, I
Skype
live
too.
oh, really? Yeah. Well, we live right next to America's Stonehenge, and it's been accused of causing batteries to die and the phones to go dead. And when people use drones, the batteries to die on those and cameras. And so we live. We have 2 acres right next to the property we bought in 1985, and maybe that's part of it too.
That's
But
interesting.
yeah. Well, our site's about 110 acres, and the hill is covered with these stone walls, which we believe was originally part of the original construction, and it contains very large slabs of stone. Farmers use field stones. They just picked up what was left by nature, usually rounded stones left by the glaciers. And we do have those boulders, and we have small stones up there. But they actually created stone by actually lifting up bedrock. It's foliated. It comes up in layers. And then they would raise it, they would shape it, and then they would use it in the wall construction. And that makes the walls look different than farmers' walls, And in these walls, we have the big standing stones that align with the sun, for the solstices and equinoxes and cross-quarter days, the moon for the 18-and-a-half-year cycle. And then we have alignments with the pole star, which back then was Thuban. Today it's Polaris. Back in 1978, we had sent our 5 years' worth of survey. We hired a professional surveyor to survey the walls, and they sent that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center. And when it came back in 1978, after they processed it, they said, well, if those stone markers were used for astronomical purposes, they won't work today, but they would work about 1800 BC, about 3,800 years ago. And that's because the Earth's tilt's very slowly changing. And it did agree with our carbon dating from 1971. We took probably about 12 carbon datings. By 1971, we had taken probably about 6 or 7. And the oldest one on what we call the main site, where most of the stone ruins are located, where the sacrificial table is located, is about 1 acre. And again, it's surrounded by about 110 acres of some other chambers and standing stones and serpentine walls. So it's kind of a big complex. The whole hilltop, we think, was a ceremonial center. Not probably where people lived, but where they went up and worshiped, maybe when somebody died. Perhaps on one of the solstices, they had some sort of ceremony that could have involved a sacrifice, for instance. So the table, as we were getting to, is about 9 feet approximately by about 6 feet. And it has a groove, which up till 2 years ago, I thought was a rectangle. And we measured it very carefully. It's about 9 inches narrower at what we call the top of the table. It's a trapezoid. And I was like, wow, that's a trapezoid. I never knew that. But the groove will collect the fluid, whether it's rain or some other substance, and it will come towards what we call the front of the table, and there's a little runnel on the top. It will fall off the table, and right below that is a cutout in the bedrock, and it's designed so that something could catch the fluid, like a vase perhaps or something, or even a stone vase or a ceramic vase, and the fluid would go into it. The table's about 32.5 inches above the bedrock, supported by 4 stone legs, and it's a bell shape. It looks like a big bell. And we do know the quarry site that it came from. We still can see part of the shape in the bedrock where the stone came out. And again, there's no metal tool marks in the bedrock or on the table itself. And that's the way the whole site was done. They didn't have the plug and feather and all the drilling that you see in modern, quarrying. This was done actually, and helps to prove the site wasn't built in the last couple hundred years, I think. It was an ancient technique. Attached to the sacrificial table is the biggest chamber. It's called the oracle chamber. And the whole site, all the chambers are lined up north and south, east and west out of true north. And the oracle chamber runs about almost 30 feet north and south, and then it has a branch that goes east and west. The north and south is what we call vertical stacking. The stone's just vertically stacked with a roof slab on top. The east part of it is actually corbelled, and that corbelling is like an inverted staircase, almost like an arch. And that's the way the ceiling looks. It's kind of arch-shaped, but it doesn't have a keystone, but it has flat slabs on top. And it runs about 20 feet of this kind of arch shape to it. And that's what you can find at a lot of the megalithic sites in Europe, that corbelling effect. It's an architectural style, if you will. And we found 2 other chambers just recently, looking at them and surveying them more carefully, actually have that corbelling in the corners, which we never detected. We thought they were kind of vertical, but if you look at them very carefully, there's that subtle corbelling in them. And by the way, those chambers, we just checked 2 more chambers. We did the floor plan. They're trapezoid. And I was reading about some of the structures in England, and trapezoid is some of the way they're shaped. So I said, oh, then it's another little tie there, to Western European sites, that trapezoid. So, but the sacrificial table, yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's not a cider press or a lye stone for making soap, and you can't get a horse and a cart down there anyway because it's got a big ramp on one side. It's got the oracle chamber on the other side. It has two gigantic standing stones. I don't know if you've seen photographs of it, two big monoliths. But you can't get a horse and buggy or a horse and cart down there to unload the apples if you were going to do that, or if you're making soap, you just can't get it in there. But that's one of the explanations by the mainstream or the skeptics. Oh, it's a big cider press, or it's a stone for making soap. And there's no historical record or archaeological record supporting that. It's a theory by some people who just don't want to believe that it's a ceremonial table.
Yeah.
So, but it's pretty big. Yeah, it's a pretty impressive piece of. It's a main feature on the site for sure.
Have you heard of a place called Jekyll Island?
Where is that located?
I believe it's out there on the East Coast.
I don't recall that offhand. Maybe if you describe it, I might have heard of it, but not offhand, no.
Well, it's where a lot of the rich people have properties out there, like the Rockefellers have a cottage out there, and several other wealthy bloodlines. They have property out there as well. But one of the most interesting things that a lot of people aren't aware of is that they found a Canaanite altar on Jekyll Island, along with mounds and with giant skeletons.
Boy, that's unknown to me, especially the Canaanite writing. I mean, that's, and a table, and some sort of a altar, stone altar.
Mm-hmm. They have a big, gigantic sacrificial altar. And like I said, when I heard about the one at America's Stonehenge, it was the first thing that jumped to my mind was like, oh my gosh, the Jekyll Island Canaanite altar. I was like,
wow. Well, I'm going to have to find out about that because, like we've been in this since the 50s, and that's the first time I've heard of that.
Yeah, there's a gentleman by the name of Tim Bence, Bence, and like I said, he's the only person I've ever really heard talk about it. But he's done. He's gone on different people's shows and talked about the Canaanite altar and all that. And like I said, it's just. As soon as I heard about the American Stonehenge one, I was like, okay, there's a connection between these two.
Is that island on the? It's not on a lake. It's on the ocean, is it?
Yes, sir. Let me. See if I can pull it up real quick.
Well, it sounds fascinating.
See here, Jekyll Island. Let's see here. It looks like it's close to a place called Piney Bluff.
What state would that be in?
Zoom out. It's actually looks close down by Florida. It's close to Brunswick.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So that's not even up this way. It's way down there. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I'm going to have to do a little checking that out then. I'll have to try to Google that, and I can talk to some people at the New England Antiquities Research and see if they've had anybody down, because we have members all over the country. I mean, almost every state, So that's something that somebody down there might have gone over and taken a look at. That would be, see the photographs of it and the diagrams. That'd be pretty interesting to see if there's any, if it relates to our site, similar to it. That's interesting. It's the first time I've heard of that.
And I figured you'd be interested.
The Canaanite thing, yeah, because we found markings in a chamber, we call it chamber in ruins, and that's the one we found. It has core building on the side, 3 of the corners, and it also has a trapezoid floor plan. And we got 3 carbon datings out of that, and the oldest was 4,000 years old, and that kind of agrees with that Harvard-Smithsonian Center report, which was done 7 years later. The 3 stones that came out of there, Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard looked at them back in the 1975-76 time period, and he said, this one's Iberian Punic, and it says this is a sun temple dedicated to sun god Baal on behalf of the Canaanites, basically. So the Canaanites were the Phoenicians, just the word the Greeks gave them, and the Romans call them the Punic. So we have the Libyan markings and the Celtic, and Barry Fell theory is that although the Phoenicians came out of the Phoenician coast, they went across the Mediterranean and they set up all these 50 trading colonies, like Carthage is one of the most famous. They got into Spain, and like Gades, or it's called Cadiz today, or what was it called? Carthago Nova was another Phoenician city in Spain. The Phoenicians were in Spain, particularly southern and southwestern Spain. I've been to Spain before, and I didn't get a chance to see some of the ruins, unfortunately. Saw the medieval, but up in the north, the Celts came into Spain, and then the Libyans from Libya came across the Mediterranean into Spain, and he felt it was a melting pot. It was also a jumping off spot to explore the world, and particularly heading over to the Americas from there, heading south like Columbus did, and then make it off probably towards the Central America, and then either going to South America or heading up to North America, catching the favorable winds and the currents, and coming across that way. About 7 or 8 years ago, just after my dad died, on the Merrimack River, which comes down from New Hampshire and then it goes into Massachusetts, heads out to the ocean. Right where it goes out to the ocean near Newburyport, Mass., they found during construction a Phoenician coin came out of the ground. So, it's one of those, wow, okay, what's that doing there? So between the markings found from Maine all the way down to Brazil, those, like the ones in Brazil on the Paraíba, I think, river, were Phoenician. Those were found in 1872 and identified later. But the Phoenician writing's been found from, South America all the way up to, like I say, to Maine. And then Celtic Ogham and other Celtic writing and Libyan writings have been found here, too. So that island you mentioned is a new one for me. I'm going to have to check that out. They think it's Canaanite. I don't know if they had any inscriptions with it. Did they find anything that identified it as Canaanite, like markings or anything?
I believe that there was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I believe that there was. Like I said, I'll forward you some of this stuff so that you can check it out. And like I said, if it ends up tying in, and like I said, that y'all are able to piece these together, that would be even more interesting for me, because like I said, I'm about information and getting it out there and trying to learn as much as possible.
Absolutely, yeah, that's incredible, and that's maybe another new thing we can add to it. I do know a couple of years ago I read where Phoenician anchors were found off near Bimini in Florida. So not too far from what you're talking about, maybe a couple 100 miles, but down in Florida, Phoenician anchors, supposedly were found there, and I saw pictures of them. They were interesting. Are they Phoenician? But I don't know, but that's what the claim was. They were Phoenician anchors down there.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past it. But another thing I also wanted to ask you, was it you or was it your son that did the thing about the lining up of the equinox from y'all's property across the ocean to the one in England?
Yeah, that was my son Kelsey. He did that about 2012. He was in college, and he was actually trying to see if some of the alignments, the solstice and equinox alignments off of our property would go through other. He was looking basically at other sites in New Hampshire and in New England, because we know these sites exist and where they're kind of located. And he was working on a couple of them. He found a couple interesting that were lined up with some of these alignments. When the summer solstice sunrise, though, is the one that I think you're thinking of, and it has a beautiful stone. It's shaped asymmetrically. It's another monolith, stood up stone, and it has asymmetrical top. It's actually sloped, and the sun rises perpendicular to the slope of that stone. And the reason they shaped it like that is when you stand at our site and you look at the far distant horizon where the hills, there's two hills that touch the sky, and it's a notch. It's shaped like a notch. It's sloped. And so what they did when they quarried the stone apparently and shaped it, or what we call dressing the stone, is they shaped it to fit the notch. So when you're standing at the what we call the back site, it's a point you have to stand, and then you look at the foresight, which is a stone, and then you look at the far distant horizon, we call the horizon feature, and they have these in Europe too. You have a really long alignment, and then the sun will rise 90 degrees to the stone because it worked really nice 4,000 years ago, and today it's moved a little bit down the stone from where it originally was. So he just kind of followed that alignment across New Hampshire and then went by Maine and through Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and he was trying to check and see if there's any sites up there, and there are a few sites. But then he just said, oh, the heck with it, I'll take it across the ocean just to see where this goes. And he was using Google Earth. Some people have tried this Google Map, but only Google Map doesn't work. It just goes a short distance, and it's for a flat Earth kind of. Anyway, it goes around, and if you go on the other side, it goes right through the center of Stonehenge, through one of the large trilithons at Stonehenge. It goes right through the center of it. And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of one of these. It raised a hair on my neck, you know. And he found it right after my dad had passed away, about 2 years after my dad passed away. And I think he would have been I think he would have been wow on that too, you know. Whether it means anything or not, I don't know, but it is really interesting. It goes right through the center of it.
Well, and see, that was the thing is Marzulli, after he found out about it, you know, he was talking about it and how it basically ends up right over in Lebanon, right in the area where the Phoenicians and all them were at. It's like,
yeah, it does.
Again,
you know, the other thing I found out, one of the authors who's done a lot of books and for over 10 years, he's a lawyer and an author, and he's been on TV too. His book, David Brody's, one of his last books he came out with, he did that same alignment you're talking about, and he took it right through what they call the Israel Stonehenge. It's on the Golden Heights, and they call it the Giant's Wheel, and it's an amazing stone complex with a chamber inside of it that looks a little bit like our oracle chamber, except it's filled in with a lot of debris. It looks kind of short vertically, but it has a stonework. You look at it like it looks even newer than our stonework, maybe because of the New England weathering, but it looked even fresher than ours, and it does date back about 5,000 years. But that alignment goes right through the center of that too. So it goes through Stonehenge, the large trilithon. It goes through Lebanon. I think it's Beirut. Although, I think it's actually Byblos, which is a Phoenician city, and then it goes right through the Israeli Stonehenge, which, again, I only found that out about 2 years ago when the book came out. So it makes for a pretty nice, accurate line. Our winter solstice sunset goes through the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan, which I've been to. And the south alignment goes through a effigy mound in Andover, Massachusetts, that's now open to the public for the first time. It's a gigantic, huge cairn or pile of rocks that's shaped like a turtle, which is one of the, ancient people, the turtle was one of these spirit kind of things. And it goes right through that. Our south alignment goes right through that. But if you continue into South America, it goes by Machu Picchu, which is kind of interesting. The equinox sunset goes through Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and the equinox sunrise goes through the pyramids in the Canary Islands. So there's a lot of interesting things off these alignments. If you're standing there today, if you came up and visited us and you're looking, if you went this many miles over here, you'd be in, Teotihuacan or whatever, or Machu Picchu or Stonehenge, So it's one of those, is it a coincidence? It seems to be a lot of perfect alignments for coincidences.
Yeah, and I don't believe in coincidence.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how to explain it. My son did figure if these guys are great navigators, and they knew about astronomy, and they used celestial navigation, and he actually had a way that he thought they could have done it, But there are also a thing called the grid of the earth, the sacred geometry.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that in the exact same area that we're talking about. David Flynn, who is one of the greatest researchers out there, he broke it down about that whole area over there that was basically an area called Sidon, that the Phoenicians and all them came out of, and how that tied in with there was Ham, his son Lamech, and then after him, or not Lamech, goodness. Anyways, his son that came after him, it was Canaan, and then it was Sidon. Well, anyways, that area basically has a mirror counterpart on Mars called Cydonia as well. And like I said, when he started talking about all this astrological stuff and different things and the different where everything was falling within these areas, it's like I said, I'm gonna have to send you some of that as well, because that'll blow your mind as well.
Definitely, yeah, and I think more research can be. Thank God for these new tools we can use in your computer. In the 70s, when we wanted to look at another site in New England, see if it was lined up, you had to actually get out maps, paper maps, and then you had to try to go find the hill or the place, and then walk around on somebody's property if you didn't get shot or something or yelled at, and see if there's a chamber up there, in a line. Now you can use Google Earth, and it makes it a lot easier. But I think there's a lot more research that's got to be done on that. Because I think if we have this many things that line up with a site, there's probably others. And I've been told by some of the researchers, like, wait till I show you what I got, kind of thing. And I haven't seen some of these people yet. So there's people have found some other things that I'm not aware of, I'm sure,
Yeah. Kay, did you say that you had a question?
I do. Just a couple things before I know that he's on limited time. in your bio, there were a couple things that stood out to me that I'd like to ask, and it has to do with the, oh my gosh, and I've got it wrote down here. I can't find it now. My question is about the serpentine walls and the spirit windows. I have never heard of that before. What are those? And were they contained in the original, or has this been something that happened when the Mount... Let me start this again. I'm going to edit this part out. My question has to do with, can you explain, please, what are serpentine walls and the spirit windows that you have found while exploring the American Stonehenge?
Sure, yeah. Until I'd say 2016, the spring, I hadn't heard of them either. I had just retired from the airlines after 35 years. I was on the road like 80 or 90 hours a week. So, yeah, I do miss the flying a bit now. But I was tied up quite a bit each week doing that when I was gone away. Sometimes 5-6 days a week. But I had more time, and that opened that up. So I started doing more walking in the woods, and we're cleaning the whole forest as I'm out there getting firewood and cleaning the alignments and everything. I found my first serpent. What I thought was a serpent well. It was about 30 feet long. It was a trail that went to my dad's house. He lived actually off the north alignment on a separate piece of property. And we used to go that way on the ATV. You could walk, you could snowmobile that way. And I noticed it well before, but nobody ever really did anything with it. It was just over on the side. It's a short little wall. And one day I went by and the sunlight must have been just right. And I said, "Hey, golly, that looks like a serpent." So I got off my ATV. I walked over to it and I said, "Gosh, it's got like a head, a body." And I went to the end of it, and it had like this big kind of long tail, if you would, made out of stone, all covered with green moss. I'm like, this is the wall, and it sits on a outcropping of bedrock. The whole thing rests on like a ridge of bedrock. One part of it drops off, and it's right where it drops off is where this wall's built. It does not look like a farmer's wall whatsoever. It wouldn't do anything for a farmer. And I'm like, I think I got a serpent, but I can't relate it to anything. I don't know of any serpent walls. And over the next 2 or 3 months, I found a couple more, and I said, I think these could be serpent walls too. In the fall of 2016, we went to a meeting in Groton, Connecticut, and one of the speakers was from a town called North Stonington, Connecticut, and he actually put out a book. And he's a book writer, he's a photographer, he writes for Yankee Magazine, he's written several books about New England fishing villages, and he does a really nice job. He lived at North Stonington for 30 years, and he thought all the stonework he kind of saw on there was farmers or historic. But he actually found out, talking to other people, that may not be the answer, because Stonington is a terrible place to grow crops. It's hilly, it's rocky, it's swampy. The soil's not arable. It's just the terrain is difficult to get around. And he said, these didn't look like farmers' walls. They never have to him. He said they look unusual, So what they found in North Stonington were 400 serpentine walls, and they go from 30 feet in length. Some are linear, straight, some are curved, and some are rectilinear, 90 degree, and they always have like a head, a body, and a tail. And they go from, like I say, 30 feet up to 300 feet, and there were about 400 of them. And he had the books on like a book table during between lectures. They'd have a little break, and you could walk over and look at books and buy them. I picked that up, and I went, this must be all in New England, because there's 8,000 features mentioned on the back cover, and in 240 photographs. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is one town. And as it turns out, we call that one site. That one site is 35,000 acres. It has 8,000 features, including these serpentine walls. We think we found 12 of them now at our site, and I found the first 3 before I saw that book, and I kind of confirmed my suspicions, of our site. And then we found several more, and the biggest one is 2,550 feet. I know that Chad mentioned the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. I think what we have is stone walls doing the same thing as the Great Serpent Mound, which is about 1,350 feet. I think it could be Draco, the constellation, brought down to Earth, and these people were building these walls to kind of out of respect for this constellation, if you would. And our walls, most of them are straight. We have a couple that are beautiful big S's, like the triangular stone head. a body, and a couple of them actually have a big boulder about halfway down, and it looks like the serpent could be pregnant, or it ate its prey, perhaps. I don't know. Are you still there?
Oh, yes. I was just processing that. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
Well, after this gentleman spoke for an hour, a lady named Elizabeth, Elizabeth, I think it was, from Colorado, and she's showing stonework in eastern Colorado where it's very flat, and she's showing cairns, which are big piles of rock, multiple cairns, which is same. Just Stonington has the same thing. She's showing standing stones, and she's showing cairns with chambers inside them. These are big, piles of rock with a tiny little chamber. They call them chambered cairns. Same thing in Colorado. We were like, oh, my God, they got the same thing 2,000 miles west of here. And then she shows her serpentine walls, and one of them had a head that looked just like one of our 12 at America's Stonehenge. It was like the same thing, and my wife and I kind of sat up in our seat. Unfortunately, she was doing it by Skype, so we couldn't talk to her personally, and her two male colleagues, all three of them were talking on Skype to the whole audience. I think there was like 100-something people in the audience. And so the serpent thing's kind of new. There was a book written in 1989 that mentioned a couple serpent walls up in Vermont. The book was called Manitou. And we knew the two authors. They were very interesting gentlemen that wrote. They both passed away now. And they mentioned the serpent wall. And I read the book in 1989. But when I read the serpent thing, I just kind of read it and went right by it. I didn't pay any attention to it because I couldn't relate it to anything, But these serpent walls are in Alabama. They're finding them up in Vermont. There's a couple in Rhode Island, and there's a couple in Massachusetts. But I think we have about 12 at our site. One of the serpent walls has windows, and these are beautiful linteled windows. They're maybe 2 feet in width, maybe a foot in height, perhaps, and the width of a wall. And they have these beautiful slabs of stone that were quarried that were used like the header on a window. One of them has 4 of these windows in a row at the bottom of the wall. The same thing down in North Stonington, Connecticut. They get the same kind of thing. What people have referred to them as spirit windows. I did a 2-hour show with a doctor, MD, out of Indianapolis back in the fall. She was a nurse in Texas, and she says I was at a Catholic hospital, and I'd have a key to open and close windows. And sometimes when the family was there, when the person was passing away, they would ask me to open the window to let the spirit pass. I don't know if you've heard of that before. My wife had, and I was surprised because I've been talking about these. Oh, you have. So I think that's a modern day version of what these ancient people were doing. And people say, well, which way did the spirit pass to the wall? I don't know. But I think it's a way of it's like a memorializing it. It's like a symbolic thing. It's like the spirit will go through this wall, and this is what this opening is built for, So I think it's like that's a modern day version of, I think, what they were doing with these spirit windows. There's no other purpose for them. They wouldn't serve any purpose on a farm unless you wanted to let little turtles crawl through them, or maybe a little bunny rabbit hop through it or something. I don't know, but, or a squirrel or something to run through them. But there's no purpose for them at all, But they took time to design it, build it, and quarry stones to make the lintel, So my dad didn't know anything about any of these, And we have, I guess, 12 we found at our site. But they're in Vermont or in Martha's Vineyard, down in Massachusetts, on the island, and they're also down in North Stonington. And I've been told they're elsewhere, like in New York, down on the Hudson River. There's over 200 stone structures, but the structures themselves may have windows, but these are actually the stone walls. They have the windows in the stone wall itself. So there might be a spirit window. That's our best guess. Somebody else may have a better explanation. I don't know.
This may sound like a silly question, but these spirit windows, you said that if you wanted to fit a small turtle or maybe a little rabbit, so these are small. Do they look out? Is there actually a opening, or is it closed with just that tiny? Tiny. We don't have too much time on the radio show to discuss that, but I will say that they are like a window. They go through. However, some of them seem to have a stone on the one side that's like a flat slab that looks like it's been displaced, like it could have closed the window. And the stone, if the stone wall's been there for a couple thousand years, things move around in trees and things cause damage to them. The walls are built on bedrock, so we don't have that frost problem underneath the walls. We've identified that by testing the walls, and they're all sitting on bedrock, and that's good. They're really, in Connecticut, the same thing. That helps protect them. But it's the trees and stuff like that, if it's not people, causing damage. But I think these windows, most of them today, you can see through them, but a couple of them I have found, like I say, on one side, there'd be like a big slab that if the slab was stood back up,
and they're at an angle, so it looks like it was standing and it fell down at part of an angle, it would actually block the window, perhaps. Maybe it was something where they opened the window when somebody died and let the spirit pass, just like they did at the hospital, So
Amazing.
it's a little more complicated. I try to keep it simple so somebody can get a visual on it. But these are definitely linteled windows. And on a farm, they would serve no purpose unless you wanted little animals to run back and forth underneath them. But these walls will only run 100 feet. The animal could run around the wall or run over the wall because the walls aren't that tall. And these walls do contain orthostats. They're like stone slabs quarried from the bedrock and stood on their end. And our main site has that on some of the chambers, too. Big, tall stones, and then the roof slabs sit on top, and the same thing you find in European sites. They're called orthostats. But in the walls, people call them spines. It's like the spine of the serpent or whatever, like the back of it. And every one of our serpent walls seem to have that feature, too, like a spine stone somewhere along the back of it. And I don't know if I got cut off last time. Some of the stone walls at our site and in Connecticut have a big boulder or the wall actually gets wider. The stones were piled up wider. And some people suggest that's where it ate its prey. That's what you're seeing going through the body. Or maybe it's pregnant, perhaps. I haven't seen a pregnant snake, but that's what I've been told.
Well, my other question... I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, please, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, the serpents in the, Adam and Eve. It's in the St. Patty chasing up the spirit worship. And I've been to Ireland. There was never any snakes there. There's no fossil record of that, but they were chasing up that serpent worship, in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
They found one of the rooms has the serpent carved on it. So it's in China, in South America, this, Quetzalcoatl, down in Mexico. I've been to Chichen Itza. It's everywhere, and even in the Southwest United States, the Native Americans are doing a serpent thing. So it's a little hard to identify when we talk serpent, what culture, because it seems like a lot of people did this serpent thing. 4,000 years ago, the pole star was Thuban, and Thuban is one of the stars of Draco, the serpent. So in the course of the evening, that, as the Earth turned, you'd see Draco revolving around Thuban. Yeah, it was kind of cool. So that would have been a real full point, a very important point in the sky would have been Draco 4,000 years ago. Because today it's the Little Dipper end, of the handle, Polaris, So,
right.
Yeah, so the heavens looked different back then.
Yes, that's kind of hard to fathom in our mind.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors you have to put in there. To figure it out.
The other question I have for you now: the size of America's Stonehenge, and with the fact that there are others located throughout the United States, are there any that the measurements are identical that you're aware of, or is this an original of this size?
As far as the size of our site, I think ours so far in kind of a, like 100-acre area, 110 acres almost, is like we have everything on our site on this hill, and the hill is about 360 feet above sea level, about 20 miles from the ocean. And the nearest river, Merrimack, as I mentioned, where they found a Phoenician coin, comes up within about 5 miles. So if anybody came overseas, they could come within 5 miles of our hill. We think even closer, that area is silted in now, where they could have sailed in a little closer. We talked to USGS. But Stonington is, 35,000 acres, and then you can have a site next door over in like a town named Plastow, New Hampshire. There's one chamber. We call that a site. And then you go down the road 8 miles away, Danville, New Hampshire has a chamber. In fact, you have a plaque that mentions our site. The town of Danville has it as part of the historic. So our site is kind of unusual in a way. It's kind of like I say, the Reader's Digest version of, but if you get down on the Hudson River, there's over 200 of these chambers. That's the highest density of chambers that you can walk into, stone structures you can actually get inside of, right on the Westchester County and Putnam County, New York. So that's a great question. It's a little hard to answer, but right as far as I know right now, ours is kind of everybody tells us, you got everything here on this hilltop, about 110 acres. It's just loaded with all sorts of features. It might have been kind of a mecca for people to come from around to go up on top of this hill and have ceremonies. What we have found in the last couple of years is and we knew of a couple in 1982 and a few more over the years, but in the last couple of years, we found about 33 stone slabs, and these are quarried, huge, big slabs that were quarried, propped up with a stone, and then abandoned. And we had known of a few, as I mentioned, in the 80s and 90s. By probably 10 years ago, we knew of about 15. But we found that we doubled that just recently. We think they had a much bigger plan, the original builders or whoever they were, on building the site and continuing to construct it. And then all of a sudden they abandoned it and they left. Originally, we thought they might have finished the site, used it for many years, and then they abandoned it. Like everything that happens everywhere. You build something, use it, and then, it goes down and you leave it. That's happens at all these ancient sites around the world. I think they had a bigger plan for our site, and they just never finished it. And something drove them away. So, what was that thing that, made them leave? We just don't know, so.
These slabs that are there, are they big enough that they would have had to have had some kind of way, a tool of some such to be able to carry them, to get them where they want them to be, and to set them up? Or is it possible that these also could come from the giants, that the giants could have been the ones to erect it?
Right. I mean, if you're a bigger person, obviously, if you're something like over 7 feet tall and you're muscular, you're going to have, an easier time moving. The stone here is about 163 pounds per cubic foot. And so we can estimate the weight of some of these slabs. I think the biggest rock is in the oracle chamber, and they actually moved it to create, it's like an anchor stone, we call it today. It was a huge glacial boulder, and then there's another part of it that was separated, and then it was moved away to build that east-west corridor, and then they built the core building above it, the structure. That's about 50 tons. And then a lot of the roof slabs weigh anywhere from a couple tons up to, 4 or 5 tons. So again, if you're a very small person, I mean, you can be strong and small, but if you have more mass, obviously, it's going to be easier for somebody that's a bigger, taller stature to move any of these. And that's true of all these sites, anywhere you go. And you can walk into our oracle chamber and stand up. I know I would say I've seen people about 6'5" walk in there, and they just have to bend their head a little bit. So I don't know if anybody like 9 feet tall or 10 feet tall, if they built this, they would have had to really stoop over to walk into these chambers. But somebody, up to 6.5 feet tall would have no problem walking into like the oracle chamber, probably the chamber in ruins also.
What about the
But the bigger
elevation?
you are, obviously. Oh, go ahead.
I was asking, what about the elevation up there? What's the elevation like?
The elevation of the hill?
Yeah.
Oh, the hill. Yeah, the hill's 300 feet above sea level. It's not the highest hill, but it's one of the highest hills. The hills around us are about a half a degree uplook, and it makes for a better sunrise and sunset, moonrise and moonset. If it was zero elevation, the sun due to diffusion would be much more, and the moon too would be very more distorted, just like when you go out to the ocean, it looks really like a big ball, And if you wait a little while for the sun to rise off the ocean about a half a degree or before it sets, it's much smaller, and it makes for a more accurate alignment. So the horizon around our site looks like, we even said in the 1970s, it looks like the back of a serpent. It meanders up and down. It's all natural. And it might have inspired them, part of that constellation as well as the back of that. And where the dips are and the ridges are is where the alignments, work. Like they'll have a dip, and that's where the summer solstice is, and they made it work, or the winter solstice. So they took advantage of the horizon for the different astronomical events, which is kind of cool. They actually worked it into their plan, I think.
Did you locate the quarries where they were getting a lot of the stones for the location?
Yeah, and it's not like a big hole in the ground. They were just lifting up the rock is what we call foliated. It's like an onion. But the thing is, the hilltop was pretty bare 4,000 years ago. We did about 80 shovel test pits in the 1990s. The president of New Hampshire Archaeological Society spent 6 years doing that. And her husband was a doctor of geology from Tufts, so she had a great right-hand person to help her out with that. He was there just to give her information. He was still teaching at the time, and then he was retiring at the end of it. Unfortunately, he got hit on a highway, and as soon as we were going to use him for more expert information on what the hill looked like 4,000 years ago, somebody hit him on the highway and took his life, unfortunately, right after retirement, too. But she did all these shovel test pits, and what she came up with was 4,000 years ago, probably 75% of the hilltop was bare. And so when somebody sent out a work crew, a quarry team, hey, we need a stone about 10 feet by whatever, we need you to go out and get that. They could actually walk around and look for ideal candidate on the hill, saying, oh, this is a great spot. We can get in here and work this bedrock, and we can lift up the slab. Today, it's all covered with trees and brush and dirt. which is gathered over the centuries since the site was built, leaving a layer of soil on top of the hilltop, covering that. So if I sent you out, you'd say, but where am I going to go? It's all dirt out here. I know the bedrock's below it, but I can't see the bedrock. It's covered with trees, brush. So it would have been a much easier process for these people to go out at that time and pick out areas and say, I'm going to quarry this part. I'm going to get in here and work this fissure or crack in the bedrock. We're going to raise it, prop it. And that's what we're finding. We're actually finding the stone stuck through the bedrock, through the dirt. You can just see the top of these gigantic slabs. And then you have to get down on your hands and knees and kind of look underneath it and say, oh, there's a propping stone. And then, maybe another 100 to 200 years, you're going to lose these stones because the soil will keep slowly building up. It's about an inch every century. And then, they'll disappear, But we can still see them now stuck through the dirt. But 4,000 years ago, these things are raised right off the bare bedrock, and then they walked away from the project. And some of these stones are 1,000 feet from the main site downhill. So if their intention was to add them to the main site, they would have to drag these multi-ton stones up a hill, and in some cases up to 1,000 feet.
That's what I was getting at. Was if they're, and that's the thing is most people don't really think about the weight, the mass, like you said. And for them to move something that big, that bulky, that heavy, and then carry it uphill, I mean, you're getting into stuff like Tiwanaku and stuff like that, and Machu Picchu and so on. It's like, just think of the size of the stones. A couple of tons, that's a lot. You know what I mean? It's like, but when you start getting into excess of 40 or 50 tons, stuff like that, it's like now you're gone past the realms of, how did they do that? Because, to move something that big and that massive and to be moving it up a hill that, like you said, is not level or anything like that. It's like that requires so much energy and so much knowledge that, most people can't wrap their minds around it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, who would do that just for the heck of it? Nobody would, It was a determined effort to do that. And we did find on the northwest corner a part where our snowshoe trails go, but and it's just beyond the snowshoe trails, where we really don't go out to that part of the property that often. And I came across some stones, and I showed them to the vice president of the New England Antiquities, and he got out there, and he knows our site a little bit, He's been with the group for many, many years. He's visited us. He lives in Connecticut, so he doesn't get to our place that often. But I took him out there with my son, and I showed him some of the stone walls and some of the stones. I said, doesn't this look like South America, some of the stonework down there? Look at the size of it. And he goes, oh, my God, look at that. These are gigantic stones stood on their end, and they were just part of a wall, and it actually was a 90-degree wall with these huge slabs. I think they're some of the biggest ones on the property, and why that massive in that particular area, I don't have a clue, except it is. And that's all I can tell you, And that's where our visitors don't get out there, It's a part of our property but we are going to do some forest management, and we're going to remove a lot of the trees and make like a park-like setting on the whole hill. And it will generate some revenue because they'll take some of the trees, and it becomes kind of like they make lumber and stuff. But we want to protect all the walls. So we're back to trees away from the walls. We'll be able to do more aerial imaging. We are doing drone and aircraft thermal imaging of the hill. And when we're done processing all the data, they'll have high-definition pictures combined with thermal imaging. This camera was like $12,000 too, this gentleman's using in his drone. He doesn't want to see it crash, obviously. I think he's got insurance on it, but it's an expensive camera. And he's getting a new one that will actually simultaneously do high definition and thermal at the same time instead of two separate, you have to do it. Is
that actually better than like LiDAR or something?
You know what? We got LiDAR too, and I think LiDAR is fantastic, but I will say I think our walls show up so much better, at least on the latest thermal imaging pictures. I know LiDAR keeps getting better. I think the pictures we have are from several years ago, but so far it looks like the walls, the serpentine walls and the regular walls show up so much better.
I'm just curious.
It's amazing. And what he has to...
I was just going to say, I'm just curious if there's more buried underneath the ground that you guys are even unaware of. Because, I mean, that's the thing.
You're on to that.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're on to that. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He said you can go down about 14 inches. If you have a structure or something hidden just below the surface of the dirt, you will see it. It will show up.
Well, like Petra Jordan, they say that, National Geographic just put out an article not too long ago about 85% of Petra is still buried underground, You know, same thing with that. Wow. You remember the thing in the jungle down in Amazon not too long ago where they were doing the LiDAR and they ended up finding an entire city. I mean, a massive, humongous city that was buried underneath the jungle out there. And so,
in South America?
Uh-huh.
South America? I read The City of Z, you know, and now that guy, Percy Fawcett, I think it was, 100 years ago. And he got lost. I mean, they haven't never found this gentleman, but he was onto that whole thing about the Amazon did have civilization, and now they're finding it. They're finding like all these big, gigantic earthworks and causeways and roads that they thought that nobody was living there. You know, just a small little tribes. You know.
Yeah, they found an entire city that they said easily could have held about 5,000 people. Because I mean, it had structures beyond belief, and like you said, roads and everything. I was just like, oh my goodness! It's like if they were to do something like that out there on y'all's property, and like say there was an entire city buried underneath y'all's property. Oh my goodness.
Well, we're thinking that's good, very good point. What we're looking for is where do the people live? Because we think what we're looking at, this 100 acres on top, at least on the top of the hill, is probably thought of as more of a religious area, and the people wouldn't live in their church necessarily. They would live, you know, maybe near it, but not in it, you know. And so we're looking at the sides of the hills, and some of the area of the hill is kind of has like a flat terracing to it. And I think that's where we would like to see the images. Once he processes it all, it takes a huge amount of processing capability. He has to lease this $350 a month. I think he leases the software to do it, and he's already starting to do some of it. And he's going to end up with a 1 square mile, you know, thermal imaging and high resolution. He combines it all into a 3D map, and I think once we remove more trees and he'll come back and more of that, we might find where the people live. You know, and that will tell you more because they'll have that junk there that they left behind, and maybe we can identify the culture. You know, so we're kind of excited about that for sure. You know.
Yeah, I almost cried whenever I heard that you said that they took some of the stone or the slabs from there and built a bridge out of it, and I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, well, just like many sites. I know even Stonehenge is missing a little bit, but I know Avebury down the road near Stonehenge. I've been to Avebury. They built a village in the middle of Avebury, you know, a few hundred years ago, and Avebury's older than Stonehenge, so they gobbled up some of the stonework to build some modern structures a couple hundred years ago. I'm like, you get there, it's like, oh, man, that's a shame, you know. I mean, the village is beautiful, but they kind of ruined some of it. You know, they took the stones and they actually started splitting them up to make stones for buildings, you know, to make them smaller for walls and buildings. But that's true in Ireland, you know, at the Newgrange, and one of the sites called Nalta and part of that's missing. They used it for road building.
Did some out there in Egyptians and stuff, yeah.
You've been over there?
I have not been over there. You know.
It's cool, yeah. But damage there too. The same thing, damage. You know, so it's true of all these ancient sites. There's so much damage. I know the Newark, Ohio mounds are amazing, but they built a golf course in the middle of some of the earthworks. You know, they're better than a shopping center for sure, but they built a golf course there and kind of messed up a little bit. So, but our site's missing maybe 25% of the original, maybe a little bit more. We're not sure. They started carrying the rocks away for building some bridges and some other constructions too, which is really a shame.
Well, thankfully you guys got in there and y'all were able to preserve as much as y'all possibly could, because like I said, had you guys not got in there, there's no telling what would be left today.
You'd probably be homes up there today, because it's all the homes going in here, they all have 2 acres and they're really nice homes. And our neighbor that has 60 acres next door, in their family for probably about 100 years, they divided the land in half. They subdivided it, and houses are going up, you know, which is, you know, I understand that, you know, property taxes high, and they made really good money on selling the property, but you could see it because it was a farm, you know, it's being divided up, and that's our neighbor right next to us. And there's some interesting wall patterns down there, and who knows, maybe the ancient people would have lived over there. We looked at the walls, and it's like, wow, those walls do not look like farmers' walls, and that's where the homes are going up now. So, you know, I don't know.
Well, Dennis, I know we're getting to the end of having you on this time, but I would like to invite you to come back for a part 2. There's so many questions left to ask you.
Thank you so much. And we got some new things coming up with that imaging and stuff. So I'd love to come back and talk to you. I really enjoyed it this evening. Thank both of you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, we'll be in touch to get that set up. Would you please let everyone know how they can contact you about America's Stonehenge?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're open every day but Christmas and Thanksgiving. And our website is stonehengeusa.com. And in that website, there's an email. You can send us messages, and we'd be happy to try to answer your questions. And there's also a phone number in there, too, so if they want to call us. We have Facebook, and we have Instagram. And Facebook's good, too. I think we have about 9 or 10,000 followers, so if we have a special activity coming up or a radio show, I try to put it on there, too, to announce it, or if I've done one, I put it on there, too, so people can, go into the archives. So feel free to give us a call or email us. And the website, again, is stonehengeusa.com.
Now, your site on Facebook, is it under America's Stonehenge, or is it under your name, Dennis?
It would be under, it's under America's Stonehenge. And there's one other thing, too, I failed to mention. We have an app we started last year. It's under America's Stonehenge, just like the Facebook. And it's under your Google Play, your Play Store, Android or Apple, or iPhone, I should say. And it has a virtual tour. It has text, it has pictures, and it has audio. And so you can actually take a tour of our site from your easy chair. And if you do come up and visit us, you can use it on our site as you're walking around. It will show you pictures, and it has, really a lot of information, more than our 4-page tour guide map, which is also pretty good too. So that is a really good app, So if you want to see what we look like, you can do America's Stonehenge. You can download it, and then you can do a little tour, So.
That's awesome. I can't get there, so I'm going to take a look at that.
Oh, okay, great. And if you ever do come up into Boston, we're only about 40 minutes to an hour away from Boston, right up Route 93. So if you're ever in New England up this way, anybody, please stop on by.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you, Dennis, for being with us. And I'm going to go ahead and say the closing prayer, and then we'll say our good nights.
No, thank you so much. I look forward to the next time I'm on with you. Thank you so much, both of you, and everybody listening.
Oh, thank you, Dennis. We're so glad that you came on with us, and we can't wait till the next time. So I will be in touch with you on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to learn about America's Stonehenge and bringing Dennis Stone on with us. And the night's broadcast went great. We just had the one interference, which is fine. We got through it. And please bless everyone as they go through the week. Look after Dennis and his family, and Chad and his family, and mine. And the listeners, Father, please, if they have not heard your calling, let them hear it now and come to you. And we ask this, Father, in Jesus' holy and mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight, everyone. We thank you for tuning in. And until next time, good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Sky, gazing far into the night, I raise my hand to the fire.